Okay, we are live. We can start.
Okay, fantastic. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Octo finals of this year's edition of UADC. Congratulations to both teams for having made it this far. We're looking forward to a lovely debate. My name is Daniel Makpool. I'll be serving as your chair for this particular round. I have no preferred gender pronouns, and I'd appreciate if everyone in the room could introduce themselves, starting with my panelists and then the teams. While introductions are happening, I'd appreciate it if both teams could send their speaking order in the chat along with the motions that they vetoed. Thank you.
Hey guys, this is Jyotirmoy. I have no preferred pronouns either. All the best.
G'day, I'm Rob. He is good.
Okay, fantastic. I see them in the chat. So I take it we're debating on the first motion, correct?
Yes, we're debating the first motion.
Okay, fantastic. The Saudi Arabia-China one. All right, that's great. I'll be posting timestamps in the chat, but I advise all speakers to keep themselves timed as well. If there are no further questions or concerns, I'd like to invite the Prime Minister to begin the case for side proposition. Here.
So before I begin, can I ask for the link of live stream?
Oh, sure. Could one of the ORCOM members provide them with the link?
Never mind. Sorry, I got it. Never mind. Sorry.
Okay.
I believe I'm clearly audible.
Yes, you are.
Three, two, one, go. First, I'm going to tell you what our policy is. Then I'm going to set up the incentive structures of the three actors involved. Then I'm going to talk about internal politics, economy, and external politics. So first of all, what do stronger ties look like? I think it looks like backing up each other in international committees, voting alongside China, for example, when UN tries to be like, oh, Xinjiang, you're like, no, it's okay, Xinjiang is okay. B, you do increase economic ties, that is already happening in status quo, where we're seeing China increasing the buying of oil from Saudi Arabia instead of the US or Russia, signing trade deals. And note that China is right now the fastest growing economy, is going to overtake US by 2025. So what are the incentives of Saudi Arabia? I think first is supremacy within the Middle East, win proxy wars against Iran, establish Shia supremacy, establish the Wahhabi way of life in every other Middle Eastern country, and have influence over other Middle Eastern countries. Secondly is the continuation of autocratic policies. That means to continue the killing of journalists and human rights violation, so that the House of Saud and the King, Mohammed bin Salman, Prince, can continue to maintain power in Saudi Arabia. Thirdly is diversification of its economy. I'll tell you why it cares about it later in my substantives. What are the incentives of China? I think China is going anti-US and actively telling countries that were recently pro-US to take on its sides. We have seen how Philippines and Duterte has gone from completely pro-US, where you had US based there, to pro-China. We have seen Saudi Korea and Japan increasing economic ties with China because China is actively incentivizing them to trade with them and taking their side in the trade war. B is establish political hegemony. We have seen how China is trying to actively bully countries and actively trying to establish soft power on other countries through the Belt and Road Initiative, how it is also interacting with other autocrats in Africa. We have seen how it is helping other dictators in Africa. C, also to push back against the international community that's calling it out for human rights violation. These are the incentives that exist of China. So what are the incentives of US? Under the Biden administration, note that you're pushing Saudi Arabia into bubble with human rights. Biden has continuously called out Saudi Arabia, and Kamala Harris too is going to tell you that it's going to sanction economically and diplomatically against Saudi Arabia for whatever is happening in Yemen. B, there's internal democracy that exists, hence the voter base that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris has to pander to, believe in democracy and believe in freedoms, hence do not support the things that Saudi Arabia is doing. C, Joe Biden has actively taken up the rhetoric that Trump continued that we need to bring our troops back home. Whatever happening is Yemen is very, very wrong. We need to pull out from those wars. This context is very, very necessary for the debate. So first of all, about the economy. What is the problem, right? Why the Saudi Arabia needs to diversify its economy? A, the US economy is literally dying due to the pandemic, while China's economy has sustained itself due to its aggressive policies. B, the demand for oil is dying. We have seen that how oil has continuously fluctuated. And B, that's oil, one of the main markets that Saudi Arabia lent oil to was the US, whereas now US itself has started producing oil due to fracking and has become one of the main suppliers of oil now due to these new technology. Secondly, Saudi Arabia wants to diversify its economy and build infrastructure from tourism, because oil is not just reliable, as market often fluctuates, and also the need for renewable resources are lowering the demand for such things. Third, articulator. Thirdly, US has been benefited by traditional allies that are going to China, and it will just being US traditional allies of the US are being left out. These traditional allies, I have probably proved to you, are going towards China in a trade war. Note that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have actually called out China and have supported continuing the trade war and making countries take one side or the other. As in SNL famously, she said, China, you call that human rights? Those are human wrongs. I think they are actively against China and human rights violations. Fourthly, US is just losing outright. China is going to suppress the US economy by 2025. Better to be on the side of winners than losers. So how do we solve it? How do we solve it? China did not put tariffs on oil when trade was happening. China is so note that during the pandemic contest, we saw that US started putting tariffs on oil coming from Saudi Arabia, while as China didn't, and tried to recover the economy by also helping Saudi Arabia, something that is already happening in status quo, and we're continuing that. China has incentive to sell excess iron and steel and stipulate demand to run the economy, as it already does in Africa. So, and Saudi Arabia wants infrastructural development to develop tourism to diversify the economy. B, this also ensures connection with countries in the Belt and Road Initiative. That means you have connectivity with half of Asia and almost all of Africa. I think because you allow to sell your products to Saudi Arabia, sell your products to China, and China is also interconnected with these countries, you're naturally also economically allied into this big chunk that is actively alienating the US alone, and all countries are coming in this huge big chunk. B, you're able to get natural resources that are abundant in Asia and Africa. You're able to diversify. When you actively take stances for China, China has the ability to politically posture these countries, because literally China is the one that is helping these countries not starve, like in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, or these African countries to not starve, to make sure that the economies are running. Hence, it can tell you, oh, I will no longer care about if you don't listen to me. Hence, China has the ability to tell them to give their natural resources to Saudi Arabia, which is very, very crucial for infrastructural development. And China also has rare earth minerals that are crucial for economic development that do not exist anywhere else, especially in the US. Before I go now on to about talking about political hegemony, I'll take a POI.
I think you're misreading the actor. It's not the Saudi government. It's not Mohammed bin Salman. It's not the Saudi royal family. It's the country, Saudi Arabia. Why is human rights violations in the interests of the nation?
I think usually in debates, when we talk about Saudi Arabia or any country, we're talking about the rulers of that country, because the people are very, very diverse. We literally cannot debate that. There's no reason to be had. We have to talk about every group of people. It's always specific. Please don't do a definitional challenge, please. Why does Saudi Arabia has to be political hegemonic? So why is US no longer funding callings? We have seen Joe Biden calling out human rights violation, US withdrawing troops. Why will China fund these? Because there's a natural incentive that China has for gaining political hegemony in the Middle East. Because when you are trying to win wars in a country like Yemen, you can in Yemen, China has the ability to sell you arms and weapons and give you raw material to build these weapons, while US is actively backing out in these wars. China is incentive because it also wants to expand in the Middle East, as we have seen through its increasing trade with Iraq, and Saudi Arabia has a natural incentive to push out Iran from its influence within Iraq, and hence is incentivized to work with Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia and China incentive work together in Iraq to push out Iran and Iran. So Iran, so never been prouder to propose.
Thank you, Speaker, for that fine speech. I would now like to invite the Leader of the Opposition to begin the case for side opposition. Hear, hear. Hello, Leader of Opposition.
Yeah. Just give me a second.
Okay, cool.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right, cool. All right, so starting in 3, 2, 1. So yeah, I mean, I agree with the Prime Minister. If you're talking about a country within a debate, you need to talk about the vast majority of people, not a single royal family and its interests. We think what they do is vastly misconstrue the idea within this motion. For the vast majority of Saudi Arabians, the economic interest or the national security interest that we are talking about matters far more than any other interest than they talk about. But secondly, even the economic ones are better catered to under our side. But the sort of things that they mention, like human rights violation, like literally these things are not in favor of the vast majority of individuals within South Africa. Like literally none of the ethnic groups within Saudi Arabia, my bad, probably want these sorts of things. So given this context, I don't think they've got the debate right. But now let's talk about a few things in terms of engagement before we directly move into this. So the first thing I want to say with regards to the idea of how it diversifies the economy, it's not like we are, by building closer ties with the United States of America, we're going to literally trade off any and all sorts of trade with China. This also means that we will probably have some sorts of trade with China. But secondly, I'm not entirely sure what the status quo is, right? Because to a large extent, the Prime Minister says there is still trade with China with regards to how China buys your oil and whatnot. So if it is true, if the status quo still remains without necessarily having closer ties with China, what is the marginal utility of having those closer ties with China? I'm not exactly sure. But next they talk about the ridiculous idea of how like the USA-China closer ties or like China will eventually help better solve the Iran problems. All of those things would be rebutted within my substantive. I'll talk about a few things in my speech. First, I'll talk about why this context specifically requires Saudi to have an interventionist actor, and then I'll talk about why China is less likely to intervene and why USA is a better protector. But first, a few things in terms of context. The first is that Iran right now is the most aggressive it has ever been. It is rising in power, and it has recently bombed Saudi oil facilities. At this point in time, Saudi needs an actor which does not pledge support to both Iran and China. Notice that China and Iran are trading partners, which means that the interest of Saudi is directly antithetical to the interests of Iran, because one, they have like antithetical geopolitical interests with regards to areas within Middle East that they want to control, with regards to Yemen and whatnot. They have antithetical economic interests with regards to the sort of trade deals that they want. They have antithetical religious interests within the area where Shia and Sunni ideologies clash. For all of these reasons, we think it is directly conflicting to Saudi's interests. But we think at this point in time, Saudi has, for the first time in its history, actual military threat within its regions, which affects the national security, which which affects a vast majority of Saudi individuals, which gives it a responsibility as a country overall. Why is this the most important context? Because recognize that Iran has bombed oil tankers, or in Yemen, Irani-backed Houthi rebels are getting more power. Given that that is true, it affects the national security. Why is security the most important context? Because one, we think security is the fabric through which all other metrics within Saudi Arabia function. For example, if your security is not guaranteed, a vast majority of your international investors will not want to invest within an economy which does not know how to protect itself. But second, if the vast majority of Saudi's income comes from Hajj revenue, if vast majority of the Muslim population does not come from pilgrimage within this region because it fears for their security due to all the threat that Iran is posing, we think these things are not going to put Saudi in a very good position. Why then do we think that China is less likely to be, why do we think China is more likely to be non-interventionist? Recognize the trend of China. For the longest time, China is less likely to politically intervene within its regions unless it has geographical interest. Look at the regions where it did intervene. South China Sea, India. These are regions where it literally wants geographical territory. Most of its conflicts are territorial in nature. Look at where it didn't have anything to say. The Rohingya conflict, where it needed to take an ideological stance, but didn't, although it had a lot of trading partners which required it to take a stance. It's because they can't justify killing Chinese people and give legitimacy to its authority if more and more Chinese individuals are being killed. In the Saudi region, they have no territorial interest, so less likely to militarize. But furthermore, we also think they have a comparatively weaker military overall. Why then do we think US is likely to be comparatively more interventionist? 4 structural reasons under this. First, we think Biden is inherently more centrist in nature, which means to a large extent he will likely benefit a lot of US weapons manufacturers, which means it is likely to take into agreements where it supplies weapons to Saudi Arabia in some way or the other, or give ammunition support. Second, they're likely to want to continuously buy Saudi oil to stock up their own supply and to stock up their own supply of shale oil and drain out Saudi Arabia. Saudi tankers getting bombed is bad for their own interests. So for the literal selfish interests of the United States, it is likely to come ahead and protect Saudi interests with regards to any and everything. But third, we think the insularity stock argument that they might run is not contingent, not like sustainable in the long run, because for vast majority of instances, these are not likely to go on. But why then do we think that China, why are we unlikely to make China dependent on us, even if we move ahead with closer ties? 3 reasons under this. The first is that China has recent contracts with Russia where it has bought oil for 5 years and whatnot. Second, Russia and Saudi are competing big dogs within OPEC. Evidence of this is there was a recent standoff within this region. So given that China already trades with Russia and has a pre-negotiated contract with them, we think they're unlikely to benefit Saudi within this context. Third, oil prices are at an all-time low, which means negotiating power lies with individual nations that have pre-negotiated agreements with regards to oil. Under this, we have literally nothing to offer China other than oil. If that is true, then we think any agreement with China will put them on a comparatively higher position of power compared to us. Why do we think that it is we think realistically then it is less likely that China will prioritize us over Russia? The comparative is extremely, extremely important. One, we think USA and Saudi already have a pre-negotiated agreement which will ensure that Biden continues to buy oil from Saudi Arabia. Even if the pre-negotiated agreement doesn't work, here are structural reasons why this will happen. One, Biden needs a V-shaped economic recovery all at once because he needs to justify election. He needs to take the US economy, which means he will obviously not take it from Russia. He will obviously not take it from Iran, but also not from Venezuela because Guaido has no power within that region and Maduro will likely not supply the US. Also not from Belarus and Ukraine, which means no other oil source is available for the United States. Biden likely to cave in far more than China, which means Saudi is likely to comparatively benefit. If their entire case is contingent on an economic diversification and benefit, we have substantially shown you how the economic benefits are far higher under our side because you are likely to be in a comparative position of power under our side of the house far more. For all of those reasons, extremely proud to.
I thank the speaker for that speech. I would now like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case for side proposition. Hear, hear.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right, just give me a second. Right. Starting in 3, 2, 1. It is a lie that the opposition in this debate needs to defend a towing the line sort of situation, a soft stance where we can continue to increase our relations with the United States, but at the same time keep trading with China, right? Because in the growing wake of the US-China trade war and the hostile relations that actually exist right now, structural reasons for which I will provide you later, we think it is high time that they made a choice, and China is the right choice. First, let's talk about why does a choice exist, for 3 structural reasons. One, because China actually has a huge initiative called the One Belt, One Road, which means that they are likely to try and expand not only near and in the Middle East, but even in the North African region, which means just by simple close proximity, they're likely to gain an economic advantage, not only within the Saudi Arabian region, but rather all over the world, trying to become the Asian hegemon. Secondly, things like the Huawei controversy now mean that a lot of countries, including Gulf states, are forced to pick sides, whether they're pro or anti the sort of 5G that is coming from China. These are things that the US cannot actually do. Thirdly, China is actually threatening to ensure that they're banning the export of rare earth minerals to the US, which are absolutely instrumental in being able to do things like separate the crude oil that the US produces itself, by the way, and does not only buy from Saudi Arabia as they would want you to believe, but secondly, and more importantly, is what goes into the ways into the products within your Silicon Valley in and of itself. But thirdly, is important for your military weapons, something which obviously China does not want the United States to then have, which means that there are growing tensions between these countries. But lastly, and most logically, we think Chinese economy, as predicted by experts, is going to cross $20 trillion by 2025, which means US sees us as an active threat and is unlikely to be willing to work with them. They need to come to us and prove to us why US and China are going to be buddy-buddy. Absent of that, Saudi Arabia cannot do both at the same time. Let's rebut some things, because the main frame that they wanted to run on is Iran bad actor, therefore war going to happen, right? First response to this: unlikely that an all-out war is going to break out between Saudi Arabia and Iran, given the sorts of interests that exist within the region in and of itself, and the fact that even if you're able to tell us that there are some sort of bombings and whatnot that exist, we don't think that you prove to us sufficiently why the US being able to back you up is necessarily the best deal or the best sort of counterfactual that you have at that point in time. But secondly, and more importantly, we think the alternative is being able to piss off China at one in time when you're not strengthening relations, because they don't characterize to you what that looks like, right? In Chaitanya, we don't necessarily just tell you what status quo looks like. We tell you that this strengthening of relations is actually happening at the expense of the US relations, and why it should continue to happen, and why status quo should perpetuate, right? This necessarily absolutely looks like Saudi Arabia introducing China within Chinese within like the school education curriculums and within university education, right? This looks like Aramco signing like a $1 billion trade deal with China. All of these things are pissing the US off right now. So our stance is to be able to have a perpetuation of status quo, rather status quo plus, right? To be able to ensure that sort of thing is then happening. So the alternative in their world is pissing off China. And if their claim is true that China is supporting Iran so strongly, then obviously it stands to say that like Iran is going to be much more hostile to you when backed by China at a point in time when Saudi Arabia is being backed by the US, which is something that China then sees. Let's then analyze what sort of incentives you actually have as the United States, right, or as China in and of itself, and why you're actually growing influence within the Middle East is something that you need to be able to acclimatize to as Saudi Arabia, right? There are 3 simple reasons for this. One, because of the fact that China wants to cut off the US military from like certain amounts of waterways within the Middle East. This looks like them setting up military bases within like the Strait of Malacca near like Djibouti. Secondly, because these countries are literally ideologically very, very similar at this point in time. Recognize that Saudi Arabia is part of the Gulf Cooperation Council, right? And literally every other country within the Gulf Cooperation Council, like Kuwait, UAE, Israel, Egypt, all of them have actually like not condemned, but rather applauded China's efforts in Xinjiang as being important counter-terror and de-radicalization efforts, which means that in a world where every single country in the world is shitting on US China, you are likely to then try and ensure that you're buddying up with the region that is most likely to then support you. But thirdly, pulling out is the last thing that they would do, because these are absolutely key waterways that exist within the Arabian Peninsula right now, right? Which means China's influence in the Middle East is likely to keep growing. The impact of this is simple. At a point in time when you don't get closer with China, when you you don't ensure that you're actually like supporting China at the expense of the United States, two things happen, right? One, they're able to block you out. Recognize that countries like UAE, Israel, and Bahrain are actually gaining a lot of popularity and a lot of hegemony within the Middle East right now, which means they are categorically likely to economically shut you out. Secondly, and more importantly, we think they're likely to block you out in terms of like oil, right? And I'll get a little bit more on that analysis later. Why then does the trade-off actually exist in the first place, right? One, because the motion assumes so, right? Like recognize that it says that you're supposed to use it at the expense of your relationship with the United States in and of itself, which means that it is one or the other. But secondly, and more importantly, we think that these humanitarian tensions that the US is also increasing with China is something that's very good. So I'm self-proclaimed DSL, so the rest of my speech is going to be very simple. US bad, China good. First, on why is the US necessarily a bad actor, right? The first thing that we tell you is that they are not necessarily, as the LO would like to lie to you, are not your major trading partners in terms of oil and whatnot, right? And Chetu gave you structural reasons for this that went unresponded to. One, because the boom of shale oil that actually exists within status quo. Two, because they're actually shifting away from crude oil to become more sustainable, like their entire like boom of like electric cars and whatnot, which actually ensures that they're actually trying to use less oil and of themselves. They say that they want to stockpile because these particular United States people have like lesser incentives right now because the prices of oil are at an all-time low. But you recognize that China is doing the exact same thing, right? They're stockpiling Iranian oil, and at that point in time, when you don't try and lock your share within the Asian market right now, is a point in time when you actually lose. Secondly, and more importantly, we tell you the US stance that exists against Saudi Arabia within status quo, which is absolutely bad for you, right? The indiscriminate killing of civilians in Yemen within 2015, the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi, the Iranian nuclear deal in 2015 were all things that the US was actively able to condemn Saudi Arabia for, right? All of this means that diplomatically speaking, you're losing traction on the international front as well. But thirdly, and more importantly, it was your dear Joe Biden that you want to talk about that wanted to support being able to halt weapons to Saudi Arabia or halt the sale of weapons to Saudi Arabia within the Congress right now. Your Trump was the person who was actually able to veto this thing because he just randomly loves Saudi Arabia so much, right? The counterfactual in our world is simple. In our world, China can absolutely back you up at a point in time when these certain human rights violations or whatever are going on right now because they're facing the same thing. But secondly, and more importantly, you can do the exact same thing that China does, right? You can say that the US is just hating on us because they don't have enough trade ties with us. In a world where you actually buddy up with them, you have to be held accountable. Don't let them get away with by saying that this debate is about the people of the country of Saudi Arabia and whatnot, right? Because obviously you're going to look at the nation's most important diplomatic interests that actually exist, and Saudi Arabia is a monarchy. I don't even know what you're talking about there, right? In terms of why China is actually much better, because recognize precisely because oil prices are at an all-time low, your ability to do this is very, very important right now to be able to tap into the Chinese market, right? China has actively been budding up to Saudi Arabia, especially because they want to ensure that they get some amount of regional hegemony within the Middle East, right? This necessarily doesn't mean that like these particular individuals are then likely to just try and shift away from Russia, but it's about being able to give actors like Russia and Iran a certain amount of competition, right? Because China wants to toe the line and get that sort of hegemony within the Middle East. We think that's why it's precisely important for you to be able to capitalize right now, because otherwise you will be left in an economic cold when the US won't obviously want your oil, and China is obviously going to turn more hostile towards you as well, which would lead you economically bad, which is far worse for the sorts of investors that you want to talk about in their world. They don't care about security, they care if you have something to give to them. For all those reasons, we propose.
Thank you, Speaker, for that speech. I'd like to invite the DLO to continue the case for side opposition. Here.
You can hear me, right?
Loud and clear.
Starting in 3, 2, 1. The previous speaker shouts a lot, but most of it is assertion. If he's going to try to win this debate by just explaining why China is a growing economy, Let me just debunk that. I'll prove to you why China is a slowly shrinking economy and US is about to have a V-shaped recovery. And then I'll go into the nuanced perspective of what this debate really is about and why ultimately the nuances that they've ignored from LO's speech will win us this debate. First, China's economy is not likely to grow in the pace that they're likely to believe. Number one, the manufacturing sector is dying. This is because the minimum wages of the country are at an all-time high. The reason is the more an economy grows, the more expensive it becomes to pay those people wages. And that's why the vast majority of manufacturing has shifted to Vietnam and Bangladesh. If you don't believe me, well, you shouldn't believe the facts that Gov gives you as well. Number two, the reason why this is crucial is because within your economy, the most oil-sucking part of your sector is manufacturing rather than services or primary. If your manufacturing is dying, you're less likely to buy oil in the first place, which is, by the way, the only thing Saudi has to offer. The second layer of way in which they say this, that, China is growing with a lot of technology. Okay, let me prove to you why Chinese tech depends on the US. The Huawei crisis was a trade war that USA was most likely winning if COVID didn't happen. 4 structural reasons why. I'll give you like literal examples with Huawei. Huawei first needs semiconductor suppliers. Its suppliers are KLA Tencon, Lam Research, both from the United States. It needs EDA software. Its EDA software suppliers are Cadence, Synopsys, Mentor Graphics, all from USA. It needs IMDM manufacturers, which are Intel, Micron, Texas Instruments, all from USA. It needs designs. Designs for Huawei come from Global Foundries, also from USA. All of this proves that for Huawei to thrive right now, it is dependent on the United States. So just because there was a trade war and you use the example of GDP growth doesn't necessarily mean that China was winning the trade war. The vast majority of OBR expansion stopped once that trade war started to happen, and it's more likely to be able to sustain the moment US crunches it. By the way, there are literally no other semiconductor suppliers in the world. The only other major supplier is Japan. Guess who's having ties with Japan? USA. Guess who's also trying to purchase and trying to shift towards USA? South Korea. It's untrue that China is gaining control within this region. The vast majority of United States is currently clamping on the alternatives that China has, which is why, by the way, China is so nice to USA, is trying to look for deals, is being open to welcoming the Biden administration and going away from Trump. The next thing we want to argue is that even if you don't believe all of this, China's economy is a bubble. It is a lie that these stats mean anything. This is because it's taken huge amounts of stock market loans and is currently within a financial market debt crisis that is first hidden because the CCP can manipulate information within its stock markets and its financial markets that you don't currently have access to. And the evidence of this is the huge number of ghost cities that no one lives in. The construction, where did all that money come from and where are the ramifications of it? The reason why you don't see it is because the CCP is particularly good at creating a very inefficient market that doesn't feed off that insecurity. The reason why you think the USA is weaker is because they're more transparent about it. But the impact of that and the real life example of that is the OBR expansion has stopped. It's now looking for individual trade deals. I'm from a country that has just signed an individual trade deal with China, but is not part of the OBOR. This is why China is caving in order to survive. The CCP is at an all-time weak because it knows sooner or later its economy is going to crash. So it needs real-term deals rather than OBR expansion. So that, I think, disproves a lot of the premise that the shouting from DPM wanted to base it on. The second thing they argue for is HR violations are bad. First, the premise is the US criticism is bad for legitimacy. But the comparative is the moment that you don't have US as your ally, the criticism is only likely to get worse. And therefore, your legitimacy is also likely to be worsened more. By the way, it's not just the fact that it's USA. The moment the USA goes aggressive on you, starts calling you things like you're a rogue state, it's also likely to be true that all the other allies of the United States, which are Europe, which buy your oil, which are the vast majority of Asia, which buy your oil, all of that is also likely to cave. The third thing they say is, we need to diversify trade. Guys, this is a wash because the analysis is examples. You get access to Africa with no analysis for why that is your best market. I just posit that lots of deals with Europe, which are USA's biggest allies, are your biggest buyers of oil and are also likely to have the biggest companies to invest. If you believe their assertions, presumably you should believe mine as well. Number two, the US has tech industries as well that can supply technology. Look at Apple and the ways in which it is going into the 5G manufacturing market, in the manufacturing of the M1 chip in order to create that. Look at the ways in which the different kinds of telco industries of the US are looking to diversify. That in and of itself is also likely to be beneficial to you as well. Before moving forward, I'll take a POI because I think this disproves all of your premises.
Sajid, let's say it's true that China is being hurt a lot by the US right now and is losing the trade war. How then do you think they're going to react when you start to buddy up more with the US in and of itself and your plan for China?
Comparative. It's not a comparative change. The status quo is one where we buddy up with the US. If we are not being actively harmed, status quo continues. If you shift to China, that's where the change happens, where USA, which I've just proved is stronger, is going to be vitriolic onto you. You cannot push a false comparative when what we're defending is the status quo, guys. That's why we think they have very little understanding of this debate. Now, why do we win? They didn't engage Wafi. We proved to you that intervention is the most important thing. We just gave you lots of reasons why USA is more likely to intervene. They need to sell weapons. Secondly, an additional layer of analysis, they need to defend Israel, who they bloody well care about a lot. And the moment you increase Iranian presence and Iranian territory, Israel is under threat. So Israel lobbyists work for the benefit of Saudi Arabia as well. China, I'm not sure how much you can influence them at a point in time where they have already negotiated deals with Russia. No response to why this isn't the most important argument in this debate. The second thing we proved was how we can create a system or a culture by which we have greater oil sales. The analysis is US has shale oil. Guys, shale oil is bloody expensive to extract. We're in a post-pandemic world where USA is not going to want to take that cost. Therefore, they're likely to have cheaper access to oil and buy it more. I've also given to you reasons why China is less likely to buy this more. Third, the geopolitical angle of people not coming to Hajj, it just doesn't depend on Wafi's analysis of economy, but also depends on ideology. When you side with a country that kills Uyghurs, the moment your imams try to portray the lifestyle of Saudi Arabians and Wahhabis, you're less likely to be explicitly engaging or accepting of that. USA, on the other hand, is something you're desensitized to and culturally influences you a lot anyway. China doesn't do that. That's why you also lose out on people coming to Hajj, which is your biggest source of income apart from oil. Where do you get money? This isn't about HR violations to keep two people in power. It's about the vast majority of Saudi Arabians, their survival in the long run for money. That's what this debate is about.
I thank the speaker for that speech. I'd like to invite the government whip to continue the case for side government. Here.
Hi, can you hear me? Can you see me? Just want to confirm.
Yes, you are audible and visible, loud and clear.
Thank you. It's unfortunate that the also very shouty DLO has decided to premise all of his argumentation on the idea that the US is winning the US-China trade war. I think, panel, we can sufficiently agree that the US is not in fact winning the US-China trade war, just based on like the pandemic situation in both those countries, the way that those countries have interacted with each other. I do not think that I need to rehash Rohan's analysis, which is still standing in the debate, about how you really do need to in the future pick between the US and China. That being said, I'm going to move on to what I think is the metric of this debate and the two clashes that I'm going to be talking about. So firstly, on the metric, right? We think the metric of this debate then does become where you are likely to have more economic prosperity and political longevity or perpetuity of your current regimes. The reason I say regimes is because like both of these countries are like monarchies / autocracies / authoritarian, which means that like there is no like sort of divide in the cultural environment that they create. More on this later. Then on the two clashes, right? I'm going to talk about economic posturing and answer the question that happens at the end of dialogue, which is where do you get money? And then I'm going to talk about political posturing. And like where the KSA is in the US-China trade war. So on economic posturing, right? So they say that like China is literally like has no money to give, and like China is struggling to bear its own weight. But the fact is, its political expansionism is well and alive. I'm not going to rehash the examples that we've already given, but the political expansionism initiative, as explained by your own example of China signing a single trade deal with Bangladesh, is still well and alive. That did not happen because OBOR has failed, but it was mostly because of like the special relation and the extensive trade deal that they wanted to create with Bangladesh to continue that like trade relation. So I'm unsure how that rebuts any of our earlier characterization, right? Then we explain to you why access for Saudi to MENA is incredibly important, right? Access to Africa. Why is it the best market? Because it is an untapped market where like that market is likely to be able to bring you a lot more production of the thing that you have greater comparative advantage over, which is oil, right? We've already explained to you why this market is likely to be receptive to Saudi Arabia because of the infrastructural reasons that we've already provided to you. Then let's talk quickly about this idea that like manufacturing is dying, right? That happens at the beginning of the DLO speech. If manufacturing, like firstly, it's not, right? Because the fact is that if manufacturing has moved to Vietnam and Bangladesh, it's because China has formed a large scale supply chain and distributive network with Bangladesh and Vietnam. China is trying to specialize and throwing away other forms of manufacturing to the countries that it has BRI/trade deals with, right? It may seem superficially to you that the manufacturing industry in China is like lessening up, but it's largely because China has created a massive distribution network that it is at its like beck and call that it can rely upon. So that's why where Saudi, if it strengthens ties with China, is going to get its money, right? So that being done, I think like the way that this links up in the large scale, right, is that the US is still in a situation where the pandemic is slowly it has slowly ruined its GDP, where millions of people file for unemployment each week. We think that it's obviously very clear which economy is ready to recover from the pandemic, which one has been recovering from the pandemic. Well, China has generally had one of the best GDP growth sectors in a long time, but since the DLO seems to think that we are debating on assertions and admits to himself debating on assertions, let me back that up a little bit more, right? The fact is that within the US-China dichotomy that exists in today's world, China is going to provide to Saudi Arabia an unprecedented sort of ability to capitalize on this Middle Eastern market that China already cares about, right? We think that it is far better when China actually can help you become the Middle Eastern hegemon, while China remains to be the Asian hegemon, because they have similar superpower at any cost, needs and intentions, right? Then this brings me nicely to political posturing. So on political posturing, right? First, let's deal with this idea of Hajj, right? So on Hajj, the thing about Hajj is that while China kills Uyghurs, we've already explained to you that the ideology behind both countries is similar, right? Both countries are headed by a group of people that want to stay in power forever and want to enforce something of a dictatorship in that place, right? In whatever form that dictatorship may take. That means that there is no cultural clash. And we think that especially within the matter of Hajj, we think that no Arabic nation state or no Middle Eastern nation state is likely to interfere with those relations, but I think or likely to explicitly engage with those relations. We think that it's far more likely that that it's something that they continue to be apathetic towards, as they have in the past, right? And then they say on the idea of political posturing that the US and EU are really good allies and that's what they want to do. But we think we've proven to you how this allyship has shifted to China, because we especially do this when we see how, for instance, China has provided the EU with PPEs in order to battle the pandemic, how the EU has actually shifted from a lot of American companies to Chinese companies. For instance, it's about accepting Chinese 5G, things like that, right? We think these are things that these are things that like the opposition does not really contend with on their side, right? And then lastly, on like this idea that the Chinese economy is a bubble and there's like a huge like stock market that that's like about to like collapse. Right? We study that China's economic collapse is unlikely to happen because those cities are a thing of the past. They existed due to a lack of demand that has been reignited because of BRI initiatives in Africa, and we think that these bubbles no longer exist on our side, right? I'll take a POI quickly now. Okay.
So by your logic, these countries always need certain things from China, but there's no nuance of what these things are. Presumably you need to sell oil to a country. Why is China going to be your biggest buyer of oil? Because I'm unclear what else Saudi can get.
Okay, I've already proven to you that the way that China works right now is it's created a massive distribution network throughout Asia, like Vietnam and Bangladesh, as you yourself have said. In that distribution network, to provide that manufacturing, it will also still need oil. That is a clear mechanism in which Saudi's oil is needed by China. I think in this situation, we are, as this is an active debate, in this situation, we are talking about like whether Saudi should choose to strengthen relations with China or the US. Clearly, the motion assumes both have some incentive to have strong relations with Saudi, right? So that being said, we think that we've like substantially taken down this idea of like how Saudi is going to benefit from this and from the greater strengthening of a relationship with China. I think we're the side that is able to provide you with much clearer comparatives on why China is a significantly better actor to side with. We are so proud to propose.
I thank the speaker for that speech. I'd like to invite the opposition whip to continue the case for side opposition. Hear, hear.
Hi, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
All right. All right, starting my speech. 3, 2, 1. Okay, I brought in the 3 parts in my speech. First, I'll talk about the biggest reason for which we already win this debate, what truly matters to Saudi Arabia, and why we think that this is the most uncontested part of the debate from their side. Secondly, trade. Lastly, politics and perceptions. I'll do a lot of cleanup work because every time there was any deadlock in the debate that we brought up because of lack of analysis from the other side, they threw a bunch of facts that made the entire debate muddy. I'm going to clear all of those out and show to you why their responses were, in most cases, random words, and I'll show you why this wins us the debate. Firstly, why we win this debate based on lack of engagement. From the first speech onwards, we told you the biggest reason, and like this is a clear contention here, when we mean the interests of Saudi Arabia, inevitably it will mean that most actors involved in Saudi Arabia. This means you need to protect individuals, people, and their ability to survive in the long term. Things like protecting your legitimacy as a safe state, for things like allowing Hajj, for the people in the economy to function normally. All of those were the initial framing we presented. What was the issue at hand? There is a currently high degree of conflict that Saudi is facing through things like oil tankers within their own borders being bombed, them being pushed to the back foot against the Houthi rebels in Yemen. Their legitimacy with Iran is directly contentious, where they have oil fields and territories in the same region, which means it was fairly clear from the get-go that the framing required from a close tie with a partner was that we need support in terms of weapons and actual like physical support with weaponry and defense against these kinds of harms. The comparison that had to be made, is this better likely from USA or from China? The question was then answered in the very first speech, where USA firstly has a weapons industry lobby incentive through a centrist president in Biden. Secondly, they have Saudi oil interests that they critically require at this point in time. But lastly, because Iran's increasing dominance means that Israel becomes threatened in the region as well, with a lot of other ongoing conflict in that belt with different countries across. Therefore, we would suggest for these reasons, US has a direct incentive to actually go into that area to establish military bases and provide Saudi's defense against all of those harms. The comparison was China, and I would like you to read through your notes. They only ever attempted to suggest that US may not give the same degree of defense, but never showed where China will give any amount of defense. Therefore, in this comparison, they've lost. What do we tell you here? China deals mostly in economic deals. The point at which they go into physical and military deals is when they have a direct territorial justification, where they use their nationalistic politics through the 9-dash line which extends beyond the South South China Sea, or their old map before different countries had become more autonomous, which allows them to go into places like South China Sea or even borders in India. They do not have the same capacity here. Therefore, if you talk about the ability to protect these interests, which are core to Saudi Arabia, China will never be able to do anything. USA is the only legitimate actor for any of this. Therefore, the biggest part of the debate where you have protection of people, where you have protection of legitimacy of the country and the safety of everyone, we've already won this debate. So if you look at the overall frame, this is already done. Therefore, then the next part of the debate, and this is where they really make things confusing. I'm going to do a few things that are quoted from their speeches to actually tell you why they actually give no material. We gave you 4 structural reasons why USA would have likely won the trade war. The first of which was manufacturing is on the decline in China in particular, because as they expand into a more developed nation, wages and minimum wages always start to increase. That was their unique selling point. They've been repeatedly called out. And because they often have manufacturing for a lot of the other developed countries' companies, they have an exceeding amount of external pressure to increase wages in the first place. What was their response? Their response was, when you change the supply chain to be Vietnam and Bangladesh, you still need oil, and the supply chain is still shifted to the other countries, and therefore China is still involved in the same manufacturing. Well, China themselves have access to all supply of cotton in their own country for production of RMG. So when RMG goes to Vietnam or Bangladesh, no, you're not changing the supply chain, you're just changing contracts to those countries themselves. Those are different trade deals altogether. China is not benefiting from those kinds of manufacturing activity, number one. Second of all, even if it is the case that you do change the supply chain, your demand for oil remains just the same because your manufacturing activity is not increasing. Your extraction of cotton at best may be increasing a little bit. The only further response they had here was, your DLO did not respond to our DPM's analysis about the pandemic situation. This is quoted from the GovWhip speech about what analysis they had for why the USA will lose this trade war. The comparative analysis we gave to you was fewfold. Huawei's entire production line on 4 different types of things, their semiconductors, the microchip, their IMDM requirements and design requirements, all come from the United States. Alternative investments would be from Japan, which currently is also an ally of the US. Also, USA is further planning on sanctions on other countries which sell semiconductors like Vietnam to restrict trade to China. All of this means that there was almost no scope for China to get a benefit that is exclusive to Saudi Arabia in terms of tech and diversity. The comparison we suggest to you further was that China is in a real estate bubble where several construction projects have failed. The OBRY is largely on the downturn. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, you could not send your workers to complete a lot of the construction projects, which are now just random pieces of infrastructure left there, which is why they're going into individual deals with countries like Bhutan, Bangladesh, and Nigeria for a lot of their other trade. All of this analysis then suggests to you that even in the absence, like if it is the case that China would have been beneficial to you, the extent to which you can get those individual deals is almost the same on our side, but it is not the case that exclusive trade with China would give you any benefit beyond those that you get from the United States. What is the further comparison here then? I would suggest USA themselves also are a good tech ally, plus they are directly allied with Western countries like Ericsson and AT&T, who are also developing things like 5G technology at a faster pace without the sanctions and the kinds of difficulties China is facing. Therefore, if you look at the overall tech benefit of trade, we suggest USA is better, but in the realistic world, trade war with 2 entities doesn't mean no trade among any other actors involved. Often trade deals are individual, which means even when the trade war is ongoing, Apple is still functioning fully in China. That is not to say that in any degree of increase in this hostility means you have no trade. Therefore, some trade that we established in the first place still exists. Better trade exists with US than China. POI.
So if you agree that some trade exists with China, what incentive do you think this increasing the trade relations with China mean that China has no incentive to try and not let an all-out war take place in the Middle East, given that that is the hill that you choose to die on in terms of Iran?
I don't even know what that question means. Like if you really think that you any slight increase in trade with China may have possible harms, that's what we've been saying from the first place. We want direct deals with USA that protects the people. You are the only side that argued about catastrophic consequences on trade. That is not what we said in the first place. So no, that is your case to defend, not ours. In any case, what are the things you ignored? Oil. And in this particular perspective, Saudi can only trade oil as a negotiating factor. We suggested to you with China, but they have pre-existing contracts with Russia. They're unable to get anything. The comparison with the US with very expensive shale oil currently and an immediate need for post-COVID recovery in a position where they have $3 trillion in debt is one where we have much better trade with US as Saudi than the other side. The final thing was perception. And this is where they really failed on the comparative, because they said US calling us out is bad, the comparison is US calling you bad when they are not your ally, which means they're going to be significantly more vitriolic when you have human rights crisis. China never calls these out anyway, so even if they are not your ally, they cannot push you down diplomatically. The comparison then is you lose out on legitimacy, you lose out on trade with US allies, and all perceptual benefits are lost for Saudi Arabia. If any of these three sectors of the debate are factored in, we clearly win this debate from opposition. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for that speech. I'd like to invite the opposition reply speaker to conclude the case for side opposition. Here.
Can you hear me? Cool.
Loud and clear.
Starting in 3, 2, 1. The most important thing in this debate is protecting the sovereignty and security of Saudi Arabia, for which we clearly win. The most important threat that Saudi Arabia is currently facing is literally their people potentially dying because of bombs that Iran sends in. There is evidence that this is possible, and it is only increasing in trend. Even if you don't believe the direct harms of that, the implicit harms of that is people no longer going to Saudi Arabia and funding the local economy through Hajj and buying things that local people produce rather than relying on purchase of oil. All of that is only possible with US protection because the US has better weapons than China. The US has an incentive to go in order to make sure that its interests are maximized. The US has weapon lobbyists that China doesn't, and the US is almost beholden to Israeli interests that China isn't. There was no response. The only response was China may still support you to some extent. It was unclear why, number one, China, which is already an ally of Iran, will continue to do this. Number two, even if they do it, why it will be as effective as the United States when doing it. The conclusion of all of this is we better protect the sovereignty and security of the vast majority of people of Saudi Arabia rather than keep 3 people in the royal family in power. I think we win on that clash already. The second thing we argued for was why, even if you enter their premise, which is China is going to take over the world, that is not a premise that is true. We gave you structured reasons for why that is likely in 3 different sectors. Number one, by the way, before going in, I want you to look through your analysis. All of their analysis is facts of statistics. China is the world's biggest economy, not an analysis of trends that are likely to sustain. The first reason we gave you was manufacturing industries and why they're declining. There was no response except you still play somewhat of a role when they move to Bangladesh and Vietnam with no clear explanation of what that role is or why that has a tie to Saudi Arabia and the purchase of oil or why that is likely something that Saudi Arabia will benefit from. That's the first thing. The second thing we argued for was that no, this is categorically untrue. There is a sectoral shift towards one that tries to prioritize the developed nation service sector and technology. Then we went into the second layer of analysis of how their technological boom is likely to be dependent on them being beholden to US interests. There are no alternatives. All alternatives are also within the hands of the US. Therefore, the technological advantage you can get is unlikely to sustain. The third thing we categorized was even if all of this was true, the financial bubble is likely to be more unrealistic or more inefficient at a point in time where it's happening within China, where the CCP can manipulate information. This is just statistically true. The reason why Gov believes the COVID situation in China is better than USA is because CCP wants them to believe it with the information. That's the same thing they do in the financial market, which is why they believe the economy is growing as well. We've given you evidence to believe that there's a crash coming, for which reason they're unlikely to be as expansionary. We also mitigated and showed you why the status quo is not shunning all of this off. Assuming that there is a crash coming, they're likely to have individual trade deals, which PM concedes to, where we trade with China already. So no, it's not a catastrophic status quo. You cannot push us to false comparatives where the world is going to collapse the moment we don't stop, we continue to side with the United States. That's why we think we flipped the crux of their case and shown you why staying with the United States is the only way to sustain, considering the alternatives that the United States provides. The third way in which we clearly won this debate was the issue of oil, where we told you that the United States is likely to buy far more than China. There was no response from the government. We also gave you that perceptually people themselves are going to trust the Saudi Arabian government less when they side with an oppressive regime that systematically cleanses out Muslims within their region. It's unlikely to apply for the US, considering the Western influence in all of these states culturally, and secondly, because there's a desensitization of a relationship that already exists versus a new relationship that is created. All of this harms people on the ground, the vast majority of people. Don't let them get away with propping up Mohammed bin Salman and claiming it's in the interest of Saudi Arabia.
I thank the speaker for that speech. I'd like to invite the government group to conclude the case for side government and subsequently the debate. Here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
All right, sure. Just give me a sec. Right, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The side that clinches this debate is the side that has the more robust stance. Because if you think about it, their claim is that buddying up with USA, as was pointed out to Sajid and POI as well, is status quo and that's likely to increase. And our claim is that you are increasingly doing trade relations with China right now, and you should only make them stronger. And the trade-off exists because one, motion, and secondly, trade war, which leads me to the first clash that we would like to talk about in this debate, whether US or China is winning the trade war, why that's important, and at the same time, not as important as they want to talk to you about, right? The first thing that we told to you, that it is an absolute lie to come up and present to you random mumbo jumbo, which like just seems like a lot of conspiracy theory at this point to suggest that like the CCP doesn't want you to know that they're losing the trade war, but they actually are losing the trade war when you actually have the ability on-site government to be able to present to you reasons such as like the fact that maybe China has not recovered from the COVID crisis, but the Chinese economy has, the fact that One Belt, One Road initiative is still literally the largest infrastructural project within the world right now, the fact that they can keep rare earth minerals, which only they have as hostage against the United States. So it is categorically untrue that China is significantly weaker in the position within the trade war. But, and here's the best part, even if that is true, and even if China is losing right now, imagine a world where you actually have Aramco signing billion-dollar trade deals in terms of oil with China right now, oil that US does not need, by the way, at this point in time, and then telling them or ensuring to them that you're continuing to buddy up with the USA in and of itself. This has far and wide-reaching implications, as we've already proven out to you. But most importantly, we think in either case, China is going to get severely pissed and is unlikely to continue the sorts of trade that you have right now. Because if their stance is that we can continue to trade with China, they implicitly agree that this trade with China is necessarily something that Saudi needs to have. But in taking that soft light stance, the mistake that they then make is not trying to be able to preempt how China will react at a point in time when you buddy up or cozy up with the US. This analysis is exacerbated when we prove to you that China's influence within the Middle East is increasing and it is a growing power right now. The incentives that we then provide to you there are something that went categorically unresponded to by this team that broke first at this tournament, right? But the most important part about this is this. Their claim is that USA is going to buddy up with Saudi Arabia in and of themselves. We told you two important reasons for this. One, they have in the past been antithetical to you. So even if you want to talk about like a centrist leader like Joe Biden who wants to try and come up and cozy up to you right now, that's unlikely to happen because he was the one who actively wanted to halt the weapons to Saudi Arabia, and coming from a Democratic Party, they would not want to support human rights violations. Then they're saving grace, and this is the best part, and I'm literally quoting Wafi in his speech in and of itself, wherein he actually is able to tell you that these people, and the reason why Saudi Arabia should necessarily buddy up with the USA, because now the US can't necessarily call you out, right? Which implicitly then also declares that you want to be ensuring that you have stronger ties with US at the expense of China. So the false comparative that they want to talk to you about doesn't necessarily exist. They admit to it implicitly, right? But secondly, on why China is actually necessarily very beneficial to you, right? Again, we told you that it's the Middle East, it's a growing power. But secondly, and more importantly, we told you in terms of oil. because China has oil partners right now, doesn't mean that one, it's unlikely to take Saudi on as another partner, but two, and more importantly, it also doesn't mean that they're likely to like ensure that like they're shutting you out completely right now just because they want to support Iran, right? The response to this is then, but what about Hajj, right? We think that that's something that is categorically untrue, given that like every Muslim majority country, like we have proven to you, has actively loves China's Xinjiang policy, calling them counter-terrorism and de-radicalization policy. So Hajj is something that we've already preempted in of itself. But more importantly, we think that it is likely that that all of these Middle East countries, including Saudi Arabia, are ideologically similar to China in of itself. So don't let them get away with that. But the last thing, and this is my favorite, is them saying that Iran is the most important part of this debate. And when asked to them in a POI as to what incentive does China have to make sure that an all-out war blows out in the Middle East, they say that's our comparative to defend. When clearly China is not going to let Iran and Saudi Arabia going to like literally like fight it out and bomb each other, right? They definitely have some incentive to moderate. Even if USA has better weapons, economically speaking, you're better off with China. This debate is not just about the Saudi Arabian people, who, by the way, live under an autocratic system. It's about where Saudi Arabia can continue to establish its hegemony and where it can stay stable in an increasingly destabilized Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you, speaker, for that lovely speech. And thank you, everyone, for a fantastic debate. You can leave the Zoom meeting. We'll be announcing the decision on Discord. Thank you.